This was the worst jobs report since last September. Just 54,000 new jobs were created in the month of May. There are almost 14 million Americans who want to work but cannot find a job. With us now is President Obama's former chief economist, Christina Romer. She's currently a professor at UC Berkeley and a Bloomberg contributor. Welcome to In Business, Professor Romer. I mean, we saw economists ratchet down their expectations, but this number far more anemic than many expected. What's the prime culprit?
You know, I think there's no one prime culprit. I think there are a number of smaller culprits, everything from the earthquake in Japan to uncertainty about the debt ceiling to rising oil prices. I think each one of them was expected to take a small toll on growth and on employment. And I think the combination of those three factors have just taken a bigger toll when they're all added together.
So do you think that we are stalling, though, in the recovery process?
I think that there's no question the economy is struggling. I think part of, what I found so concerning about today's numbers is that they weren't that much of a surprise in the sense that we'd been getting quite disturbing economic statistics, day after day and even for the last couple of months. And I think they are all coming together to paint a picture of an economy that is in trouble, is definitely struggling, and that we need to be concerned about.
The thing that the caveat you often hear with some of those more recent factors, whether it's the ADP number, and people say, oh, it doesn't correlate, or they look at gas, they say, well, maybe the price inflation's transitory, the debt ceiling, that debate, uncertainty, really, does that stop a small business from hiring? Probably not. So what is it that you think really is causing that apprehension to pull the trigger and put more people on your payroll?
So I think some of it has to do probably with the legacy of the financial crisis. That, I think you're right. Each one of these things that we've talked about probably is not enough to really affect a small business's decision. But I think in a world where we have just been through such a wrenching crisis, I think everybody may be a little more nervous, a little more jumpy, and so they naturally tend to respond more to these factors. And then I think the fact that we've had several of these factors happening all at once. Maybe no one of them would make you hold back, but when you've got 3 or 4 of them, then you start to say, boy, May is not the time to be hiring someone.
You said this is a growthless recovery, not a jobless one. Do you still believe that?
I do. I think, one of the things that's important is, as I said, these numbers are not that unexpected. When you looked at what the GDP numbers were in the first quarter, that was, it's not even at trend growth. And I think part of what we're seeing now is if you're not growing, you're not hiring. And so I don't think that we're having a real disconnect between the output numbers and the employment numbers, which is what I think of as a jobless recovery. I think this is just a very weak, anemic recovery.
And yet you get the call on Main Street for jobs now. Do we see a policy in the next 12 months from the administration? I mean, there certainly seems not to be much political will on Capitol Hill to put a package together, but can we expect something more from the Fed in terms of stimulus?
Well, I think the first thing I sure hope every policymaker in Washington is thinking is, for heaven's sakes, let's stop playing a game of chicken with the debt ceiling, because to the degree that is generating real uncertainty, it's just got to be dealt with, taken off the table so we can get on with business. I do think this is probably going to make the Fed think less about how they're going to exit and more about what can they be doing in a reasonable framework to be supporting the economy. Because
what can they
clearly
do?
Well, I think they're probably not interested in more quantitative easing, but I think a better communications policy. I think people on Wall Street and out in Main Street aren't sure of where the Fed's heading. You hear a lot of questions: how soon might they raise rates? They could actually hold long rates down by conveying it better if they said, no, we're not going to be raising rates for the next 6 months, the next 12 months. That kind of a communications policy, I think, could be very helpful.
Even though money has been this cheap for this long, you think keeping it at that low level will finally create growth?
It's going to be one of those things that would help. Again, we don't have the magic bullet, but it certainly could be helpful. You asked about a jobs program. I mean, one thing that the one way I could see something happening on the fiscal side is not as a standalone, but as part of a package, part of a comprehensive deficit reduction package. Could include some more infrastructure spending, a kind of, maybe an employer payroll tax cut, as a down payment then on a consolidation package.
All right, we shall see. Suggestion there. Thank you so much, Professor Romer, for joining us this morning out in California.
Great to be with you.